What's up, guys? My name is Jake. I'm the keyboard player and producer for Beauty Slap.
What's up? My name's Gabriel and I play trombone for Beauty Slap. So this video, we are gonna start delving into the enormous topic that is improvisation. And this will be the first of a few videos. We feel like it might be cool just to give you our thoughts in spoken word on the subject because it's a big one, and then we'll also have some videos where we do some playing and talk about specifics as they relate to our tunes.
Totally.
The biggest thing is that, first of all, developmentally and in your growth as a musician, these different things that you learn happen at different rates for everybody. And there are more right answers than other answers when it comes to improvising and note choices. But really, nothing is wrong, and it's almost like telling a story. It is like telling a story. This is just a new language that you have to speak, and at the risk of getting a little too deep, you don't have to use heavy vocabulary the first time you're gonna improvise on a solo. So something we're gonna talk about a lot in our future videos is, I can say a lot with just one note. Or in a story, if you think about Dr. Seuss, it's not like you have to take out a thesaurus to understand Dr. Seuss or, simple poetry, but it's very profound. And it's just a different way of saying a different thing. That's using different language. So the biggest thing for me starting was just like, this, I do not have to sound like Miles Davis or John Coltrane or J.J. Johnson for me. I can just say a couple things, make it sound pretty, which I like, and then see what happens from there.
Totally, yeah. So one of the things that you talk about there is vocabulary.
Yes.
So I feel like I know exactly what you're talking about, but it might just be because we've talked about this a lot before.
Yes,
so
totally.
What we're talking about there is musical vocabulary. So it's kind of it has a lot to do, for me at least, what I think you're talking about is how comfortable you are with the instrument,
Mm-hmm.
It's there are all of these different kinds of ideas that you can, convey using your instruments, and your different vocabulary to convey these might be things like certain scales, or the idea of playing notes really quickly versus really slowly, or playing legato or staccato, or all of these different styles. There's all these different combinations of things that make music. For me, I think one of the ways to expand my musical vocabulary,
Mm-hmm.
or just get more comfortable kind of noodling on the instrument overall, is just listening to my favorite music and then just having my instrument in my hand and trying to play a little bit on top of it.
Absolutely.
I think when I was growing up, or kind of starting to realize that I love music, that was one of the things that I thought was just the most fun to do. So,
Totally.
whether it was banging on drums, or trying to strum guitar chords, or ultimately on me, I was drawn to just playing the piano, figuring out whatever key a song is in, and then what all the chords are, and then can I play the scale that associates with that chord, and then you just start realizing instead of just hearing the song, you're hearing all of those different ingredients, and then when somebody's soloing, instead of just hearing what you originally described, wow, that's so crazy, I could never do something like that, it looks like so much fun, he's just jamming. If you have been listening critically for a long time, you start to hear I recognize that lick from his last album,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember when I figured it out, really it was just this one scale and then this other scale. I think it does, it helps a lot to just have a strong base in musical theory.
Yeah.
That kind of lets you talk about it in a more exact way.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately for me, I think it comes down to just listening, so in a way that you can kind of start to decipher those individual little motifs, or I think vocabulary is a really perfect way to say it.
Yeah, for me, my dad, who's also a musician, he used this analogy of language, which is, I just think, the best analogy for this. And if you think about language, especially on the point that Jake just said, you hear the solo and it looks like literally just individual letters of a foreign language that you've never seen before.
Yeah.
That's what this sounds like. And then after you are expanding your vocabulary, starts to turn into words, and then you see this sentence or a paragraph. It just comes together, and you can organize it much better in your head. And Jake was just talking about it, but when you're learning language, what's the first thing you do? You hear your parents or other people talk in this language, and you start to pick up these mannerisms almost just by, osmosis. It's like you kind of get it and you learn certain things. Then you go to school and pick up some grammar, and now like you learn some rules, but you don't even have to. And I wish I did more of just noodling around. I was so self-conscious about it, which I think is so silly now. But just to listen to music, find what you like, and just listen and just feel it and see what the groove is, like we talked about before. And that will expand your vocabulary too in a different way than theory does. Because it's almost like you can say content, but I could say it in a monotone voice, and you could, So there's content there, but it has no style. So, a lot for me, for sure, it's like, I've listened to thousands of jazz ballads, so I know what a jazz ballad trombone sound is like. And then I can pick some notes and use my other skills to get into that style. But as far as listening to genres, just like as Jake said, dive in, listen a ton, and you can listen over and over to the same tune, different bands. It's all good.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. It's something that I think I had to kind of go through when I first started approaching like soloing and improvisation, and just kind of like the whole jazz attitude of like, you don't have to play exactly what's on the page. Those are kind of guidelines, and what you're responsible for is just making the best musical decision in the moment. If you're raised classically especially, I think that seems like it's like a fundamental parting from this path that you've been on.
Yep.
Where it's like you're either kind of like doing it by the book or you're not. And I think that's like kind of a risky way to think about it, because really there's this whole gradient in between like playing something that's exactly on the page and then doing something like, what Keith Jarrett does or something, where you walk out onto the concert hall, you have no idea what's going to happen, and you sit down at the piano and just fully, improvise every note. There's a huge world in between. Like, that's why for me...
That's a great point.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
That's why for me... playing along with music that already exists, that was like a really easy way to kind of sneak into there, because it's like you're kind of responsible for doing what they're doing, but if you're playing a guitar lick on the piano, then you're going to also be forced to be a little bit creative and make some decisions there.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a kind of just something to be aware of. Don't think of these as two totally separate pools, it's a smooth gradient in between. I think that's actually a good way to kind of like start to wrap up this video. So like what this was, and I think we succeeded here, this was a very big picture, generally speaking, like how we kind of feel about improvisation and our baseline thoughts about it. Now you guys want to start playing real soon, which is awesome, and so do we. But so like getting actually started improvising, you don't want to start with this huge overarching theory. In fact, the more rules you impose on yourself, the easier it'll be to get started. So like the first person who ever taught me to improvise was like a guitar teacher, actually. I took guitar lessons for like a year, and he was like, all right, so like this is what's up. I'm just gonna comp some blues chords in the back, and you are allowed to play D. And that's just the only note that you're allowed to play, and you're gonna solo for like 10, maybe 15 minutes until like it sounds awesome, and then I'm like, you sit there and you're just strumming D, and you're like, all right, like how am I gonna make this cool? And so you're like, okay, well I only have one melodic choice. My rhythm is going to be very important here. And then, you start realizing all the intricacies of your instrument. Like I've got this pick. If I kind of like pinch the string a little bit, that sounds kind of like a different note than if I don't. Also, I can bend the string with my other hand. And he didn't say that's not allowed, so I'll try that. There are a bunch of different octave variations of D. Maybe I'll throw in some of those, and you start really realizing all of the amazing musical tricks that you can use with the note D. And you start soloing, and you're just having fun, and it sounds good. And then he's like, all right, now you can play D and you can play like an A.
Sweet.
And then it's like, whoa.
I have so much room.
Yeah, so you could, everything that you were doing with D, you have to now also learn how to do with A. And it's gonna be different. I know that it's just a different note, but like different notes behave differently.
Absolutely.
Especially in the context of each other. So you have to learn to master A just like you mastered D. And then there's the whole relationship between the two notes. And it should be harder. When you have more options for yourself, it should be harder to improvise because you should feel like there's a little more ambiguity, and you need to explore and familiarize yourself with like the new terrain there. But that would be my advice for like getting started today. If you want to just take your first solo, just put on a song that you love, figure out what key it's in, and just give yourself one note.
Yep.
See how cool you can make that one note sound, and once it sounds pretty cool, add a second note, and eventually you're going to learn how to improvise in a blues scale or jazz scale or whatever scale the tune is in.
Totally.